what we've got to be focusing on research and communication with breeders and geneticists is we've got to find some solutions.
Yeah, some guys feel like they're in pretty good shape, while other guys are, maybe getting a little concerned about what they're seeing out there.
Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. That was Justin Gilpin, CEO of Kansas Wheat, and Bryson Haverkamp, CEO with the Kansas Wheat Alliance. My name is Aaron Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. Well, it's time for a little roundtable here about everything wheat. Got Justin Gilpin, the CEO of Kansas Wheat, with us, and first-time podcast guest Bryson Haverkamp, CEO of the Kansas Wheat Alliance. He's our friend and neighbor, co-located here at the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center in Manhattan. And we're just going to touch base on a few issues as we're recording this in early May, kind of rolling into a harvest that unfortunately is probably going to start before Memorial Day in Kansas. Justin, that's not normal.
Well, nothing's really normal about this year's wheat crop. And when we think about all the challenges that we're facing and where we're at, whether it was drought and freeze and late freeze, and what differentiates this year from 2023, which was our most recent disaster for the wheat crop, when we had the lowest production since 1960, I believe, and a high amount of abandonment. Kansas was really the ground zero of that production shortfall in 2023, which makes this year so much different is that area is so much more widespread, where it's not just a western two-thirds of Kansas problem. It is an issue from Panhandle, West Texas, all the way up through eastern Colorado into western Nebraska, which is going to impact that total hard red winter wheat production, just because we had a promising looking crop when it went in the ground last fall and had a very warm, mild winter, then just didn't get the rains to help support the crop when it became out of dormancy. And then some of these late freeze, cold temperature events here in early May have kind of been icing on the cake. We're already hearing those low production numbers for estimates coming out of the southern plains, and we'll anticipate those challenges as we get more numbers and estimates as we get into eastern Colorado and western Nebraska. So unfortunately, Aaron, just shaping up to be a challenging year for our farmers.
Well, Bryson, Kansas Wheat Alliance, you guys license and market the varieties that come from the public wheat breeding program at K-State and some other varieties. And those challenges do present issues for farmers, but it also gives us a chance really to evaluate some of the varieties that are out there being impacted by freeze or drought, see which ones are holding up. So give us your perspective on the crop and maybe what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, hearing a lot of similar things, Justin, talking with our seed producers across the state, pretty variable. Some guys feel like they're in pretty good shape, while other guys are, maybe getting a little concerned about what they're seeing out there. Talking with the breeders and going out and looking at test plots, we're pretty excited about what we're seeing from a variety standpoint. Some of our later releases, Providence and Bill Snyder, Territory all seem to be holding up really well, given the stresses that they're seeing this year. And then really excited about some of the things we're seeing in some of the newer varieties too that are just got released or kind of on the track to be released here pretty soon. Things like KS Homestead or CL Plus out for Western Kansas has looked really, really good so far. And then KS Tradition and KS Flintlock both have looked strong as well. A couple anecdotal things, but maybe not as much wheat streak pressure as what we've seen in last year, but we are seeing it in some locations, and hearing really good things out of like KS Tradition, KS Territory, and their ability to hold up under some of those pressures. And so I know we're probably more concerned about drought stress and things like that, but maybe exciting for the future there if we continue to see some virus pressure on those.
It was a big question hanging over the head of this wheat crop, Justin, is, we had a disaster of a virus year last year in the wheat streak complex and Triticum mosaic and High Plains virus. Great point there, Bryson. Maybe that's a silver lining that it isn't a big disease.
That's your silver lining, Aaron.
I'm looking for anything. I'm looking for anything.
Our silver lining is our crop wasn't killed by wheat streak because we killed it with drought and freeze. And so I don't know, man. I still think the wheat streak mosaic virus is a paramount thing that we as an industry need to be on full alert from, not just Kansas or western Kansas, but for the southern plains. As cropping systems continue to change, whatever is going to be that bridge that's carrying that chromite that's causing that infestation. Even with the stresses and all the things of this crop, you are still seeing incidents of virus in central Kansas again. So I think It's not going to be the main story this year. That is going to be the biggest challenge our farmers are facing. But man, what we've got to be focusing on research and communication with breeders and geneticists is we've got to find some solutions to help through genetics, help address this virus issue, because it's not going away. And my silver lining would be the world is going to flip the switch on GM technology and the adoption of technology. If we could actually bring a virus trait into wheat that might be able to be done through GM technology, that's, I think, here in the next couple of years, that would be a huge achievement. But definitely want to keep wheat streak on the top of our mind, even though it's not necessarily the biggest production shortfall factor this year.
Yeah. Well, speaking of challenges that we have, Bryce and I, there's always talk when you get to a short crop year like this, what's the seed situation going to look like next fall or late summer? So probably not too early to take a look at that and put into consideration what you're after, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we're hearing some concerns, especially out of the more southern states, Texas, Oklahoma. I know there's getting to be some bigger concerns down there on seed supply. Starting to hear a few concerns here in Kansas. I've been in talks with seed producers over the last few days, and it seems like for the most part, guys are pretty optimistic still about where they stand from a seed standpoint, but definitely keeping an eye on how this crop finishes and if we're going to have that seed supply there or not. There are some contingency tools from a certification standpoint that we do have that they're more of a break glass if in case of an emergency type situation. So we don't really like to break them out just for the fun of it, but they are there in case, we do start seeing seed supplies get even tighter. I will say, just from a farmer standpoint, I guess I'd encourage guys to be reaching out to their local seed dealers, seed producers, if they're in need of some certified seed here this upcoming fall, just to get in touch with them sooner than later, just to get your name in front of them. That not only helps, the farmer just ensure that they get the variety they want, but it also helps the seed dealer know, hey, I might have to go out and get more supply of that seed from somebody else. Just kind of helps them understand what the demand's going to be.
Yeah. So, Aaron, that's the wheat tour is going to be going on here this month. And your role with that and working with the drivers and communicating that before they go out, having extension folks come in. I think that seed availability is going to be a discussion. What is the abandonment number once those scouts get out in the field and get a better handle on that? But as far as beyond the drought and the freeze impact, that disease impact, again, Texas just kind of was circulating an article earlier that how there is widespread virus and disease pressure that's already falling on top of an already drought stressed crop. Just like, Aaron, from your perspective, working with researchers, how are you communicating that, working with Kelsey at K-State, and what will you be communicating to some of the crop scouts to be looking for on top of just the low tiller counts due to drought?
Well, yeah, on the tour we'll look for those, not only the viral diseases, but the rust, the stripe rust and the leaf rust, and we'll probably do a little special training on the first night about freeze damage, right, and how to look for that. But it does bring up a great point, Justin. Back on viral diseases, we do have some great research being done at Kansas State University and other places across the plains, but especially into that virus complex. I've seen more dedication and more alignment between research programs on that viral disease problem. So Kelsey Onofre here at Kansas State University is working on another grant to communicate and do some research on those viral diseases. It's being looked at, but it's, as you both know, it's an evolving problem and nothing ever stays the same. I do want to follow up on the wheat tour, Justin. The USDA crop number will come out at the same time as the wheat tour is going on, and everybody looks for the number that the wheat tour estimates. But really for you, what's important, the outcome or why we do that wheat tour?
There's a lot of history with the Wheat Quality Council. The Wheat Quality Council goes back to the late 70s when it was initially incorporated as an organization to focus on working with the milling industry and farmers and bridging that gap. And the original first tours of having industry people go out and look at wheat fields prior to harvest, and that all kind of started in Manhattan as the Wheat Quality Councils continue to grow, and Wheat Quality Councils involves state commissions, farmers, breeders, milling companies, baking companies, and gives them a venue where they all are able to meet together, evaluate new varieties as they're coming to marketplace and have discussions, but then also really becomes visible with the wheat tours that the Wheat Quality Council sponsors. And as Wheat Quality Council is going through some leadership transition right now, Kansas Wheat is playing a role in that and helping administer some of the organizational obligations as far as those backroom type stuff. But then the big part is helping put on the wheat tour and making the arrangements and working with those groups. But seeing it firsthand as you and I are looking at it now in the chair of being in the role of assigning cars and logistics of flour millers from Mexico when they're flying in, how we're going to get them from the airport to Manhattan, and all of those things behind the scenes of the wheat tour that we never had to deal with. Makes it a little less fun, not going to lie.
Yeah, a little.
But boy, it sure opens your eyes to just what a unique experience this is, of the breadth of industry that actually will come to Kansas and for 3 days just have the spotlight on the Kansas wheat crop and the Kansas wheat industry. And especially this year, and being able to communicate all of the challenges that they'll see in the fields when these people are going in cars and different routes, and being able to stop at diners or the largest ball of twine, or the best part is being able to stop in and visit with some farmers and be able to hear the challenges that they have, not just with the drought and the freeze and those type of things, but the ag economy that we're dealing with right now. It's so good to open their eyes about how challenging it is with input cost and market prices and where things are at, and what it takes and what our definition of sustainable means to our farmers from an economic standpoint. And just being able to have that group all together for this week through the venue of the Wheat Quality Council Winter Wheat Tour and our involvement with that, I think that is the main thing, is bringing the industry together, and it's an educational opportunity. I do think the USDA number comes out like at 11 o'clock of day one of the wheat tour, so it takes a lot of pressure off of what the wheat tour estimate number is going to be, because that number will be out there. But people aren't going to realize, I think, is how challenged some of that, especially on day two, as those routes go through western Kansas, southwest Kansas, how many fields aren't going to go to harvest. And so it won't necessarily be so much about what the yield number is, but what is that actual harvested acres number going to be? Because I don't think we're going to have the 30% abandonment that we had in 2023, but certainly it's going to be a pretty high abandonment number that might be closer to 15 to 20%. That's ultimately going to be the thing that impacts the total production out of Kansas, even more so than the lower yields.
Yeah, you're so right about the tour. A lot of people who've never been in a wheat field, people from the ingredient side of the wheat field, seeing firsthand just how complicated the industry and the science is that goes into the food ingredient that they ultimately use. Well, speaking of boots on the ground, Bryson, we're entering that field day time of year, and I know Kansas Wheat Alliance, along with K-State, hosts a bunch of field days. And tell us a little bit about those, and maybe where folks can go and find out about that.
Yeah, so starting here kind of May 11th and going on through the end of May, we're going to be having a lot of field days put on by, your extension ag agents across Kansas. You'll be able to go to those and see some of the latest varieties, but also be able to hear from, the wheat extension specialist and disease specialist from K-State, industry representatives, breeders, and farmers at those, to hear about, how varieties are looking, but also just how the crop condition looks too across the state. I know Romulo Lalato does a really good job of kind of compiling all those and keeping those up to date on the Agronomy E update that are sent out every Thursday. And so that's a really good place to go and get the latest schedule of field days across the state. But I know you could also probably reach out to any of your extension ag agents in your county and probably get directed to a lot of field days.
And we'll try to include a website here on the podcast information with this episode about where you can go and find some of those field days coming up.
Yeah, Bryson, I know you got your finger on the pulse pretty good of what's in the pipeline of those. Talked about some of the varieties that are out there right now that people are familiar with, but is there a couple experimental line numbers that some of those that people ought to keep maybe if they get a chance to see some of those experimental lines out there, what numbers to be kind of thinking about that might be getting close to a potential release that could also be excited about that might be coming here in the next year or two?
Yeah, so I mentioned KS Tradition and KS Flintlock earlier. You might see those in a lot of your county extension plots as KS21H30, that'd be KS Tradition, and then KS20HD134, that would be KS Flintlock.
Then some some experimental lines that are on increase or advance right now would be like 167 or something like that.
Yeah, that would be Allen's newest one. It's going to be KS 150167-17.
See, I knew you knew it. I knew you knew the number.
Don't. I just try to remember the last few digits, so I kind of call it 167. So if you just see 167, that's kind of the one I'm talking about there. That one's on track to be. Hopefully, if everything goes well, that'll be released here this summer from K-State Manhattan Breeding Program, and so we're pretty excited about how that one looks. Gurong, out of the Hayes program, has a couple as well that you might see out in some plot tours here this year.
Give me a number.
21H36.
I knew it.
And 22HD158.
How many digits of pi do you know?
3.14. That's all I need to know. So,
well, I think that's really important also to mention, just to remind people of that investment through Kansas Wheat Alliance, and then also through the Kansas Wheat Commission, through Kansas State, about how that crank is continuing to turn, and there's exciting things that are out there with names they're familiar with, but that pipeline hopefully is continuing. That it feels like the hand on that crank is turning a little bit faster of some good stuff that's going to continue to come.
I mean, I look at a year like this, and I know crop conditions are really tough across the state. We're seeing a lot of drought and some other extremes, but I really think it is a testament to the breeding program that some of this crop has survived as long as it has. Yeah, I know it's still not going to help farmers. We're still not talking big yields, probably a lot of insurance claims, but I still think it shows the advances the breeding programs have made, not only at K-State, but also your other public programs and private industry programs as well, that we still have some fields that are still out there.
Well, it's a great time of year no matter what. Celebrating the 250th birthday of America this year, harvest time, and it's the, Justin, 151st hard red winter wheat harvest in the state of Kansas? Second?
Yeah.
All right, that's close. But, Bryson, I think it's important we talk about, too, the role, Kansas Wheat Alliance is more than, marketing the new varieties out there, but I know you and Justin have played a role in the ongoing search for a new wheat breeder here at Kansas State. Alan Fritz, our wheat breeder here in Manhattan, is retiring at the end of the year. And by the time you hear this podcast, the new breeder may have been announced. Tell us about your role in that process and how Kansas Wheat Alliance works with K-State and Kansas farmers to fund more research.
Really exciting opportunity. That the university was included both the Wheat Commission and Wheat Alliance on the search committee for that position. I think it, as you mentioned, speaks pretty highly that the university values the input that the Wheat Alliance and the Wheat Commission have when it comes to the next breeder, and understand that there's really key collaborations between the breeder and the Wheat Alliance and the Wheat Commission. I always say the breeder's really his true stakeholders is Kansas farmers, and so that voice kind of gets passed through the Wheat Alliance and Wheat Commission and our involvement on the search committee there. So it was a lot of fun. We had quite a few candidates apply for the position. I think there was close to 60 people applied for it. Brought in 3 really strong candidates for in-person interviews, and I know as of today, we're recording this, we don't have an accepted offer, but I think they're pretty close and potentially have an offer out to a candidate.
Justin, maybe give us a little bit behind the scenes on that process. I mean, it's more than just talking to a breeder on the phone.
I appreciate you bringing it up, Aaron. It was a unique opportunity for Bryson and I to be able to participate in that process representing our 2 organizations and wheat farmers. It does highlight that relationship between ag stakeholders, production agriculture, and the land grant mission of the Kansas State University, and that relationship goes beyond just external dollars that are helping to fund research, but also being involved in helping have input on what the future direction and key decisions that are being made. Because you think about hiring a wheat breeder, and Dave, Oklahoma State guy here, is going to resonate with him, right? A wheat breeder is not just like you're replacing an assistant professor on campus. A wheat breeder is like your head coach of your football team, right? I mean, the wheat breeder has so many touch points throughout the university, but then also ag stakeholders it becomes a very important hire, and that's why you don't see that position turn over very often, right? It's like Alan Fritz, after 26 years, is retiring after following Dr. Raleigh Sears, who'd been in there for over 20 years. So it's an important hire for an important position, and the fact that the university recognized the importance of ag stakeholders in that process, felt really fortunate to be part of it, and looking forward to what the next chapter will bring. Of course, Alan Fritz is, as you know, didn't just work on developing wheat varieties. I mean, he was in through the Wheat Innovation Center. He met with multiple people, whether it's the Wheat Genetics Resource Center, whether it's working with the National Wheat Improvement Committee, whether it's working with Romolo on intensive management projects, or USDA on virus plots. That so many touch points that wheat breeder has an influence on, that are, at the end of the day, trying to find the best genetic solutions to help farmers solve problems that impact not just what's happening within our state border, but through our region, and then ultimately feed people around the world. So it's an important relationship the university has, and that recognition we have with our leadership at Kansas State University of the importance of ag stakeholders' involvement. We really appreciate her.
And ultimately, Bryson, that wheat breeder, he or she, is that face out there for the farmers. You know, that person's the one at the field days talking about those varieties.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said Alan is, if you think of a face for wheat in the state of Kansas, I would say Alan is probably the first one to come to mind, and a lot of that is because he's out, at field days, interacting with farmers, hearing about what's working for them, what's not working, kind of what they need coming down the pipeline. And as Justin mentioned, this is a very critical hire for the future of the program, and that they're going to be needing to be out and about doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, probably another eye-opening thing is you're talking about that role that Alan and Gurong play in being out in front of farmers at field days. Bryce and I were able to kind of be behind the scenes and recognize that the wheat breeder actually has 0 extension appointment in their role. And so every time you saw one of our wheat breeders out in an extension type environment, just know that they were going above and beyond what their job description was asking of them. So
doing a little overtime.
Yeah.
Final message to our wheat farmers out there, Justin.
Well, I do appreciate the opportunity to be on this with Bryson in the bunker with you here in the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center on the Wheats on Your Mind podcast, Aaron. I continue to put out interesting and timely information through this media platform. We just had this conversation really focused on environmental conditions that are challenging with this crop, but certainly are aware of the ag economy in general, things that we're trying to address as many places as we can with markets and trying to help add value. And it's going to be a very important year that we're communicating with our overseas customers. We just are coming off of a strong export year. We're going to need those relationships to continue, even with the headline of the shortfall in hard red winter wheat production this year. And of course, being able to have that safety net package in place and that support is so important in times where you do have things that are out of that farmer's control or that do impact the velocity of a dollar in a rural economy and rural community and our agricultural areas. Those things are so important that our organizations have on the top of our mind, and our grower leaders that are running our organizations are committed to doing all of the things we can and pulling the levers we can to try to help navigate this challenging environment on behalf of our farmers.
Well said, Justin. Justin, Bryson, thanks for joining me. We'll do this again down the road. That was Justin Gilpin, CEO of Kansas Wheat, and Bryson Haverkamp, CEO with the Kansas Wheat Alliance. My thanks to them for the discussion about all things related to wheat. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. Please tell your friends about it. If you want to see previous episodes, go to wheatsonyourmind.com. Thanks for listening.